You remember the moment it shifted, even if you have never been able to name it precisely. There was a time when being around this person felt like coming home, when their presence made the world feel more navigable, when you laughed until your sides ached and said things out loud you had never said to anyone. And then, without any clear announcement, something changed. The jokes started landing differently. The teasing felt less like play and more like pressure. You began to notice how often you left their company feeling smaller than when you arrived, how you found yourself replaying conversations at night, trying to figure out what you had done wrong, trying to locate the moment where you had failed to be enough. You started editing yourself before you spoke, measuring your words against what you imagined they would think, softening your opinions before you offered them, laughing at things that did not feel funny. And the strangest part, the part that kept you awake longer than anything else, was that you could not quite bring yourself to call it what it was. Because this was your friend. This was someone who knew you, who had been there during the hard years, who had held your confidence and your history. How could that be something harmful? How could love and humiliation exist in the same relationship? Today I want to explore that question with you, not to offer easy answers or simple solutions, but to look carefully at what actually happens when friendship becomes a space where one person's dignity is quietly, consistently diminished. Because what is happening to you is not confusion. It is recognition, struggling to surface through years of attachment. There is something we rarely say honestly about friendship, which is that it is one of the most philosophically under-examined relationships in human life. We have entire libraries devoted to the study of romantic love, whole institutions built around the analysis of family dynamics, centuries of theological attention given to the love between a person and what they hold sacred. But friendship, that relationship which Aristotle considered the very foundation of the good life, has been treated in modern life as something we are simply supposed to figure out on our own, as though its nature were obvious, as though its potential for harm were too minor to warrant serious attention. This is a significant oversight, and it has left many people profoundly alone inside relationships they cannot name correctly, suffering in ways they feel they have no language for, because the harm they are experiencing does not fit the categories they have been given. Hannah Arendt spent much of her philosophical life examining the nature of power, not power in the abstract political sense alone, but power as it operates between people in the most intimate registers of existence. What she understood, and what I think illuminates something essential about what you may be experiencing, is that power is not primarily a matter of force or coercion. Power, in its most penetrating form, is about the structuring of a space. It is about who gets to define what is real, what is acceptable, what is worthy of respect, what is permitted to exist. When Arendt wrote about the public realm, she was writing about a space where people appear before one another as equals, where every person's perspective carries genuine weight, where what one thinks and feels and offers has standing. The opposite of this, the condition she called loneliness in its deepest political sense, was a condition in which a person loses the ability to appear as themselves, in which their reality is not confirmed by others, but constantly undermined or ignored or redirected back towards someone else's needs. And what strikes me thinking about this now is how perfectly this describes what happens inside a friendship that has become a game of power and humiliation. If this is landing somewhere real for you, I want you to know you are not alone in navigating this. There are many people watching this who have been exactly where you are, carrying the weight of a relationship they cannot quite bring themselves to name clearly. Consider subscribing if you want to keep exploring these questions. I look at these territories every week, and I would genuinely love to have you along for the inquiry. Let us think carefully about what humiliation actually is, because we tend to use the word loosely, applying it to situations of obvious public degradation, the cruel exposure, the deliberate mockery in front of others. But the humiliation that lives inside long friendships is far more subtle than that, and its subtlety is precisely what makes it so difficult to confront. Humiliation, at its root, is not simply the experience of feeling bad. It is the experience of having your sense of your own worth undermined by another person's actions or words. It is the experience of being made, in some essential way, smaller than you actually are. And the particular cruelty of this insider friendship is that the smallness is administered through the very forms of intimacy that friendship is supposed to provide. It comes wrapped in the gestures of closeness. It arrives disguised as honesty, as humor, as concern. That is what makes it so hard to see clearly. That is what makes you question your own perception before you question theirs. Consider what happens when someone who knows you deeply, who has access to the most tender and unguarded parts of who you are, begins to use that knowledge not to hold you but to position themselves above you. They make a joke at your expense in front of others, and when you flinch, they call you too sensitive. They offer criticism of your choices with a smile that suggests affection, but the content of what they say is consistently diminishing. They tell stories about you that center your failures, your embarrassments, your moments of confusion, and they tell these stories publicly with laughter, as though the comedy of your vulnerability is a resource available to them. They subtly redirect every conversation in which you begin to shine back toward themselves, interrupting your accomplishments with their own, responding to your excitement with a flatness that teaches you quickly not to bring your joy into their presence. Over time, you learn the shape of what is permitted inside this friendship. You learn that it is safer to be smaller, quieter, less certain, less visible. You learn that your fullness is somehow a problem for this person, and so you begin to manage it, to contain it, to perform a diminished version of yourself in their company. And because this learning happens gradually, because it accumulates through thousands of tiny moments, rather than arriving as one clear crisis, you do not notice you have been doing it until you find yourself unable to remember who you were before this friendship became what it is now. I know many of you watching this have been carrying this alone for a long time. You may have tried to mention it to someone and been told you were overthinking it. You may have tried to talk to the friend themselves and walked away from that conversation somehow feeling more confused and more responsible than when you began. You may have questioned whether what you are experiencing is real, whether your perception is reliable, whether you are perhaps the one who is causing the difficulty you feel. So let me ask you something directly. When was the last time you left their company feeling genuinely seen, genuinely valued, genuinely yourself, not entertained, not included, not merely present, but actually seen? That question matters. Hold it for a moment. And if you want to share where you are in this, I want to invite you to do that in the comments below. Not because I need the engagement, but because there is someone else watching this who is sitting with the same isolation you are sitting with right now, who needs to see your words and know they are not imagining things. If the words feel difficult, just type this: I have been here too. That is enough. Because when you write it, you give someone else permission to write it too, and something in the silence that has been protecting this pain begins to open. Now I want to go deeper into something that I think explains why these particular friendships are so difficult to leave or even to name clearly as harmful. And it has to do with what Arendt described as the nature of plurality, the fact that we understand ourselves not in isolation, but in the confirming presence of others. Human beings are not self-contained units of perception. We need witnesses. We need the experience of being seen and recognized by people we value in order to feel real, not just good, but genuinely real, genuinely present in the world. This is not weakness. It is the fundamental structure of human consciousness as a social phenomenon. The self is not a private island. It is something that comes into being in the space between people, in the ongoing exchange of recognition that tells each of us, yes, you are here. Yes, what you experience is real. Yes, you matter. What this means is that when someone we love and trust begins to consistently undermine our sense of our own worth, they are not simply making us feel bad. They are interfering with something much more fundamental. They are disrupting our access to the confirming reality that comes from being genuinely seen. And because we are attached to them, because they carry years of shared history and genuine moments of real connection, their perception of us carries enormous weight. Far more weight in many cases than the perception of strangers or even acquaintances. When the person who knows you best seems to find your existence somewhat laughable, somewhat small, somewhat in need of correction, it is very difficult not to conclude that they must be seeing something true. This is the mechanics of how this particular kind of harm operates. It exploits the very thing that makes friendship valuable, which is the weight of its knowing. The longer they have known you, the more their diminishing assessment of you feels like evidence rather than opinion. There is also something important to understand about the person who turns friendship into a game of power. And I want to offer this not as an excuse for their behavior, but as a clarification of its nature. What we call a power dynamic in a friendship almost never begins as a calculated decision. It rarely emerges from deliberate cruelty. What it emerges from, far more often, is a person whose own relationship to their sense of worth is deeply fragile. A person who has learned at some early point in their development that security comes not from the stable ground of their own inner life, but from a constantly maintained position above others. This is a profound suffering in its own right. The person who needs to be the most intelligent person in the room is a person who has never been allowed to simply be themselves in a room. The person who cannot tolerate your success without qualifying it, minimizing it, redirecting attention back to their own, is not experiencing strength. They are experiencing the relentless anxiety of someone who believes that your worth is purchased at the cost of theirs, that there is only so much worth available, and that any amount you claim is an amount taken from them. Understanding this does not obligate you to remain in the relationship. Understanding this does not require you to set aside your own experience of harm. What it does is allow you to see the dynamic for what it is, rather than what it pretends to be. Because these friendships are often framed by the other person, and sometimes by your own longing as a form of intimacy. The teasing is called love. The criticism is called honesty. The interruptions are called enthusiasm. The stories told at your expense are called affection. And you want these framings to be true because you remember when they were true or when they felt true, and because acknowledging that they are no longer true means acknowledging a loss that is genuinely painful. But here is what you must understand. Calling something love does not make it love. The presence of history does not guarantee the presence of respect. And a friendship that consistently requires your smallness as the price of admission is not, in any meaningful sense, a friendship at all. It is something else wearing the clothes of one. This brings me to something Arendt wrote about in a different context, but which I find enormously illuminating here. She was thinking about the difference between behavior and action. Behavior, as she understood it, is the kind of activity that follows predictable patterns, that conforms to established social roles and expectations, that moves along grooves worn smooth by habit and convention. Action, by contrast, is something genuinely new. It is the expression of genuine freedom, the introduction of something unexpected into the world, the capacity to begin rather than merely continue. What I notice about the dynamics of humiliation inside friendship is that they are almost entirely behavioral in this sense. They operate through repetition. The same patterns play out again and again. The same dynamics reassert themselves after every brief period of apparent harmony. You apologize, you adjust, you try a new approach, and within weeks or months you find yourself in the same position you started from. This is not coincidence. It is the nature of a pattern that has not been interrupted at its root. And what interruption at the root requires is not a better strategy for navigating the relationship. It requires something more fundamental, which is a clear and unflinching examination of what the relationship actually is. Let me ask you something that might feel uncomfortable. When you imagine telling this person what you have genuinely experienced inside your friendship with them, when you imagine saying clearly and without softening, "When you do this particular thing, it makes me feel erased," what happens in your body? Do you feel free to say it, or do you feel the familiar contraction, the rehearsed softening, the preemptive sense of how they will respond? Do you find yourself already managing their reaction before you have even imagined speaking? That contraction, that rehearsed management of another person's response to your truth, is information. It is your nervous system telling you something that your conscious mind has been working hard not to acknowledge. Because in a friendship that operates in genuine goodwill, telling your friend something has hurt you does not feel like a risk. It feels like the natural operation of care between people who trust each other. The fact that it feels like a risk, the fact that you find yourself calculating whether it is safe to be honest, is itself the answer to the question you have been afraid to ask. Now I want to address something that tends to arise at this point in the examination, which is the question of whether leaving or radically changing this friendship makes you a failure, a person unable to sustain connection, a person who gives up on people. This concern runs very deep in many people, particularly in those who were taught early, that loyalty is an absolute virtue, and that maintaining relationships regardless of their effect is a sign of strength and character. I understand the weight of this concern, but I want to offer a reframing. Loyalty is a genuine virtue when it operates inside a context of mutual respect. When loyalty becomes a mechanism through which you keep returning to a relationship that consistently diminishes you, it is no longer functioning as a virtue. It has become a form of self-abandonment dressed in the language of fidelity. And self-abandonment, however nobly motivated, does not actually serve either person in the relationship. It does not serve you for obvious reasons, but it also does not serve the other person, because it allows them to continue operating from their most defended and diminished self, never confronting the cost of that operation on others, never being asked by the reality of genuine relationship to grow toward something more honest. There is also something important to acknowledge about the grief that lives inside this examination. If you have spent years inside a friendship that has been organized around your smallness, the recognition of this is not a simple relief. It is a loss. You are losing not only the friendship as it is, but the friendship as you hoped it could be, as it sometimes seemed to be in its better moments, as you perhaps still believe it could become if you could just find the right way to reach the person you remember from before. This hope is real, and it deserves to be honored, not dismissed. The desire to be genuinely known and genuinely valued by the people we have chosen is one of the most human desires there is. But hope directed toward a person who has consistently demonstrated, through their patterns rather than their promises, that they are not currently capable of meeting you with the respect you deserve, is a hope that costs you something precious every day you maintain it. It costs you the present moment. It costs you the attention and care you could be directing toward relationships and toward yourself that are actually capable of reflecting your genuine worth back to you. If what you are hearing resonates with something you have been carrying, I want you to know that you are not alone in it, and that what you are feeling is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something in you still knows what you deserve. I create these explorations for people who are ready to look clearly at what is actually happening in their lives rather than what they wish were happening. If that is you, please consider subscribing. Not because you need more content, but because this kind of examination is genuinely harder to do alone. And there is something that changes when you know you have companions who are willing to look at the same difficult territory you are looking at. I will be here every week with another thread to pull on, and I would be honored to have you here as part of this community of people who are committed to seeing clearly. Arendt wrote, and I think about this often, that the smallest act in the most limited circumstances bears the seed of the same boundlessness, because one deed and sometimes one word suffices to change every constellation. What I take from this, in the context of what we are exploring today, is that the examination you are doing right now, the willingness to look clearly at what has been happening in a relationship you have given great portions of your life to, is itself an action in Arendt's most profound sense of that word. It introduces something new. It begins something. It is not simply a continuation of the old pattern, not another loop of the behavioral cycle that has been running for years. It is the introduction of genuine sight into a space that has been sustained by its absence. What would it mean to bring that sight fully to bear on this friendship? Not in the spirit of condemnation, not with the goal of building a case against a person you have also genuinely loved, but in the spirit of honest examination. It would mean allowing yourself to see clearly when you feel diminished, and calling that experience what it is, rather than explaining it away. It would mean noticing the patterns rather than managing them, observing what consistently happens, rather than hoping each instance is an anomaly. It would mean asking yourself honestly whether the version of yourself you bring into this friendship is the fullest version of who you actually are, or a carefully edited version designed to maintain the peace of a relationship whose peace has always required your contraction. And it would mean, perhaps most importantly, beginning to take seriously the proposition that your dignity is not negotiable, that a friendship which is contingent on your making yourself smaller is a friendship whose conditions you were never obligated to accept. There is a concept in contemplative traditions that I want to bring here because I think it illuminates something the philosophical analysis alone cannot quite reach, and that is the idea that we teach people how to treat us, not through instruction, but through demonstration. Every time we accept without response a diminishing joke, every time we apologize for having been hurt, every time we redirect our pain back into concern for the other person's comfort, we are demonstrating to them and to ourselves that this is the terrain in which we are willing to exist. This is not blame. Most of this happens below the level of conscious decision. We do it because we learned very early, often in our families of origin, that our worth was conditional, that love required smallness, that the maintenance of connection demanded the sacrifice of our own perspective. And what was learned through the steady accumulation of lived experience can also be unlearned, though the unlearning is rarely quick and is almost never comfortable. The discomfort of unlearning this particular lesson tends to manifest in a very specific way. It tends to feel like guilt. When you begin to assert your actual experience, when you stop apologizing for having been hurt, when you bring your full, honest self into a space that has been organized around a diminished version of you, the person across from you will often respond with some version of accusation. You will be told you have changed, as though change were inherently a betrayal. You will be told you are being difficult, as though the difficulty were located in your honesty, rather than in the pattern you are no longer willing to accommodate. You will be told, sometimes quite subtly, that you are the problem, that the friendship would be fine if only you could go back to being who you were before you started examining things so closely. And you may feel the familiar pull to agree, to soften, to return to the contracted version of yourself that kept things smooth. What I want to offer is this. The guilt you feel in that moment is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are doing something new. It is the feeling of a pattern encountering resistance for the first time. This is where Arendt's notion of natality becomes, for me, the most relevant and the most quietly radical idea I know. Natality is her word for the fundamental human capacity to begin, to initiate something that was not there before, to introduce novelty into a world that is always in danger of being simply repeated. She grounded this idea in the brute fact of birth, the observation that every human being who has ever arrived in this world has arrived as something genuinely new, as a being whose perspective, whose particular way of encountering existence has never existed before and will never exist again. We carry this capacity for new beginning with us throughout our lives, even when we have spent years believing ourselves to be trapped in patterns we cannot change. The capacity to begin is not something we earn or develop or achieve. It is something we already are. The question is only whether we allow it to operate, whether we give it permission to move through us. To bring this back to where we began, there is a moment in every relationship that has been organized around one person's diminishment, where the diminished person begins to see what has been happening. This moment does not come with fanfare. It does not arrive as a revelation so clear and complete that everything becomes simple. It arrives most often as an uncomfortable noticing, a small persistent recognition that something has been wrong for longer than you were willing to know. The temptation at this moment is to do one of two things. You can push the recognition back down, return to the familiar pattern, tell yourself that what you saw was not quite what it seemed. Or you can allow the recognition to become a beginning, not a conclusion, not a judgment, but a beginning of genuine sight, the first step in a longer movement toward a way of existing in relationship that does not require the sacrifice of your own substance. Neither of these paths is without cost. The first costs you the ongoing currency of your own dignity, paid out in small installments over the remaining years of a relationship that was never actually meeting you. The second costs you the comfort of the familiar, the security of the known, perhaps the friendship itself if the other person is not capable of meeting the change in you with genuine willingness to change themselves. Only you can weigh those costs against one another, and only you know the full contours of the specific relationship you are sitting with right now. But I will say this, the examination itself has value regardless of what decision it ultimately produces. The act of seeing clearly, of allowing yourself to know what you know, is an act of fidelity to the most real thing about you, which is your own capacity to perceive truth. And that fidelity, once practiced, tends to generalize. It tends to make you more able, not less, to offer genuine love to the people in your life. Not the performed love of someone managing their own smallness in order to maintain connection, but the real love of someone who knows what they are offering and offers it freely. You walked into this video with a question you may not have been able to articulate fully, a sense that something in a friendship that matters to you has been costing you more than it should. I want you to leave not with a tidy resolution to that question, but with a clearer sense of why the question is valid, why your perception is trustworthy, why the discomfort you have been carrying is not a sign of your failure to be a good friend, but a sign of your fidelity to something real. The game of power and humiliation that can colonize friendship is not the friendship itself. It is what friendship becomes when one person stops treating the other as a genuine equal, as someone whose dignity is not conditional, as someone whose presence in the relationship is valuable rather than threatening. When you begin to recognize this distinction clearly, you begin to have a choice you did not have before. And having a genuine choice, even about something painful, is not a diminishment. It is the most fundamental form of freedom available to human beings. The freedom to begin again, to see clearly, to refuse the terms of a relationship that require your absence in exchange for your presence. That freedom has always been yours. It is simply finally becoming visible.